Training past the age of 40. Can you do it? Should you do it? This seems to be a common trend among the mindset of people I have worked with and the people who ask me for advice. This may be a controversial opinion, but I hope you can take away some key points by the end that you can start implementing right away. Many people start thinking that training becomes unrealistic to do after 40, or they think it must change drastically. I would like to argue this and show you, although your training will differ from when you were 20, it does not mean it will completely change. Firstly, this will depend on the type of training you are doing. If you are training for hypertrophy, it'll look a lot different than if you are training for strength. If you are training for either of those, it'll look a lot different than if you are training for endurance. Performance will decrease with age, but that does not mean intensity will decrease. Intensity is something that actually increases as we train. We become better at pushing ourselves, and then eventually we will obviously hit a point where we peak with intensity. For example, think of when you started lifting. You probably thought you were ending your sets with good effort. So think back to the first 1 to 2 weeks you started lifting, you finished a set, you thought that was hard. Then probably a few weeks later, you were using a significant amount more weight and ending your sets with much greater effort. What you thought was difficult during your first couple weeks is now looked at as easy. This is because your intensity drastically increased in a short period of time. This is what I mean when I say your intensity will increase with time, and that when it first increases, that's just the beginning of your journey of pushing yourself and training with high intensity. So just because you can't complete the same number, whether that's a specific number of weight you lifted or a certain number of sets or a volume total, whatever it may be, miles you used to run, that doesn't mean your intensity dropped. It just means your performance dropped. So if you are just getting into training and you're around the age of 40, you would start the same, or I would have you start the same as I would start a 20-year-old who is just getting into training. So this is how I would start training. If you came to me, if you were 40 years old, you came to me and you haven't trained before, or maybe you used to train but you had a long layoff, like you haven't done it in 10, 15 years, this is how I would start. So first, frequency, the number of times you train per week. And I'm going to use this example for just general weight training. So if you're like a runner or something, then just implement your own variables into it. But for frequency, I would have that set to be moderate. So that's like 2 times a week. I would hit each muscle group 2 times per week. For volume, I would have this set low. So this would be like 4 to 6 sets per week. Intensity, I would have this be moderate to high. And then exercise selection, this depends on the goal, but if this was just general muscle building and just getting into shape, I would have 1 to 2 lifts per muscle group. And then for reps, this really just depends on the goal. It's going to look different whether it's for strength or for hypertrophy, and definitely for endurance. So that just depends on the goal. But most importantly, focusing on good technique is going to be the priority. These things are the things that I would tell to a 20-year-old, 30-year-old, 40-year-old, 50-year-old, whatever, it doesn't matter. I would start everybody here. This is the starting point. From here, progression will obviously look different person to person. The goal going forward, though, would be to change as minimal amount of variables as possible at a time. So here's what I would focus on first. First, I would focus on good technique. And then once you have good technique, getting that intensity high. Intensity should become and remain high, and that variable should be kept consistent to make adjusting these other variables easier week to week, like volume and frequency. And to change these variables, I would ask questions like, and I would ask these weekly, like how sore did a certain muscle group get, or how quickly did that muscle group heal? Um, if you're training for hypertrophy, how much of a pump did you get? How good was your technique? Things like these. And then the answers to these questions will determine the changes needed for the following weeks. And then this cycle just repeats over and over again. So I hope these few tips just kind of made it easier to transition into training if you're just getting into it. I wanted to keep it really simple because it really should be simple. A lot of this is just going off of feel, just feeling how you are. Don't compare yourself to somebody else. So yeah, that's what I would do to start if someone was older or younger, and then you change from there week to week based on answering those certain questions. And yeah, that's all I had for today.